So hippie or not, 500,000 people in Woodstock did share at least one thing: ending the war in Vietnam. Like on February 15th, 2003, when 50 million people in 800 cities worldwide marched all over creation to stop that war in Iraq from ever starting. Cell phones and social media wasn't quite together, but the people were. It was kind of miraculous. And everyone felt proud to be exercising their democratic right to protest, just as proud as those members of Congress who were exercising their democratic right to ignore us. We started hearing these buzzwords like diplomacy, dossier, coalition of the willing, weapons of mass destruction. Then President Bush started talking about peace, and I knew we were screwed, man.
As Americans, we want peace.
And so, in the spirit of the 60s, the world marched to keep that peace. 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your fucking war. Not since November 1969, when 500,000 marched in Washington to oppose the war in Vietnam, had an act of protest been so large enough or creative enough to gain the attention of the entire planet. In May 1970, in response to America invading Cambodia, 4 million high school and college students went on strike and shut down over 800 places of learning. Can you get behind that? The anti-Vietnam War protests began in 1964 and continued for over a decade until America signed its peace treaty, withdrew its remaining troops, and ended the draft in early 1973. But during that time, you had 29 student protesters killed by either cops, guardsmen, or vigilantes. You had 8 Americans, dig this, take their lives by self-immolation. 12,000 arrested at one demonstration in Washington. 3,000 draft resistors sent to prison. You had 400,000 military personnel who deserted. And just before the Woodstock Festival, you had over 80 arson attacks and anti-war bombs. I mean, this is what a revolution looks like. But you know, going into the anti-war demonstrations of February 2003, the world did feel good. The protest began in New Zealand and it followed the sun across 800 cities in 72 countries, man. Wow. Like 150 American cities joined in from coast to coast. There's no way you could ignore this, but trust me, when it comes to ignoring the will of the people, our government has a lot of experience to draw on. A lot of us cried. A lot of us screamed. Because with every bomb you see exploding, someone is dying. It's not the movies, man. That was the first, but definitely not the last time I considered leaving America.
An honorable peace.
A peace that will last.
We can indeed make peace.
Like in 2003, I really couldn't do anything about my geography, so I kept my trap shut. But let's say it had a neutering effect on my capability to demonstrate. When your First Amendment right to assembly and your omnipotent vote is devalued time and again, do you keep coming back? I mean, the Vietnam War protesters did, vilified and beaten up for over 10 years. But this felt different. The views of way more people than were actually in the street were being ignored.
Under Reagan, the establishment became quite savvy at making that which requires a moral response much harder to find. Our enemies aren't just state and federal anymore. They're CEOs. They're sitting in boardrooms. Millionaires and billionaires control our world now. How do you counter that? The short answer? You repeatedly question the legitimacy of the power. The 2017 Women's March produced no concrete outcomes, and it held no legislators to account, but by directing attention towards an injustice, it changed people's minds. A slow but profoundly powerful process that works. That was the key ingredient to all those 60s protests. They questioned the legitimacy of power. That changed the minds of people, including those who didn't even participate in the marches. When the cause is so powerful, protesters often don't think about whether marching works or not. They just feel morally compelled to show up and be counted. The collective action of a movement is a life-changing experience.